Okay, picture this. The year is 1866. You have a general with absolutely no formal military training, no fancy maps, and less than half the soldiers of his enemy, and he manages to bring the most powerful Allied army in all of South America to a dead stop. At the exact same time, military strategists over in Europe are still studying Napoleon Bonaparte as the absolute peak of modern warfare. But here's the thing that nobody knew, not even the Paraguayan general himself. They were both using the exact same playbook. And trust me, this is not just some coincidence. What we're looking at here is a truly fascinating parallel in history. We have two incredible military minds, separated by an entire ocean and a world of different experiences, but somehow they were united by the same timeless principles of victory. I mean, just look at the contrast. On one side, you've got Napoleon Bonaparte. The man was literally the architect of modern war, a name that defined an entire era. His campaigns? Yeah, they're still required reading in pretty much every military academy on the planet. And on the other side, José Eduvigis Díaz. Outside of Paraguay, his name is barely a footnote in the history books. He wasn't some product of fancy military schools. His genius was forged in the swamps, defending his home against the combined armies of 3 other nations. So you have to be asking, how is this comparison even possible? Well, that's exactly what we're about to dive into. To get to the bottom of this, we've got to look past the uniforms and the maps. The answer isn't something you find in a military textbook. No, it's found in a much more fundamental, much more chaotic truth about war itself. The great military thinker Karl von Clausewitz had a name for it: friction. It's this pretty simple idea that in any real war, your perfect plan is going to fall apart. It just will. Communications break down, soldiers get exhausted, the weather turns on you. So military genius isn't really about creating the perfect plan. It's about having the mental strength to not just survive, but to thrive when that plan inevitably goes up in smoke. And you know what? Both Napoleon and Diaz were absolute masters of turning that chaos to their advantage. And here is the brutal result of that mastery. At the Battle of Curupayty, the soldiers under Diaz's command inflicted over 4,000 casualties on the Allied army in less than 2 hours. It was an absolutely staggering defensive victory against what should have been impossible odds. This wasn't luck. This was what happens when pure military principle is applied with ruthless efficiency. So let's break it down. Let's look at the universal principles that tie these two incredible commanders together. These are the pillars of victory that really don't care about time, technology, or terrain. First up, the concentration of force. Napoleon got this better than almost anyone. He knew that a huge army, if it's all spread out, is way less dangerous than a smaller force that's laser-focused on the right point at the right time. It's all about creating a local advantage, even when you're outnumbered on the grand scale. And here's how they put it into practice. At the Battle of Marengo, Napoleon commits his very last reserves to a single, weak spot in the Austrian line. And just like that, he snatches victory from the jaws of defeat. Now, 66 years later, Diaz uses the exact same principle, but on defense. He knew he couldn't win a straight-up conventional fight, so he didn't. He basically engineered the battlefield itself, forcing this massive Allied army into a narrow kill zone, a funnel where his concentrated firepower could just annihilate them. Suddenly, his smaller numbers didn't matter because he forced the enemy to fight on his terms, in his chosen spot. Now, of course, concentrating your force is totally useless if you don't pick the right place to do it. And that brings us to our next principle: exploitation of terrain. For a true military genius, the battlefield isn't just a passive backdrop for the fighting. It's an actual weapon to be used against your enemy. And this right here shows just how adaptable they were. For Napoleon, out on the wide-open plains of Europe, his weapon was the fog. At Austerlitz, he used it to hide an entire army corps before smashing the enemy flank. But for Diaz, his weapon was the swamp itself, the mud that slowed the Allies to a crawl, the thick plants that broke up their formations. He literally turned the hostile environment into his greatest ally. And the third key principle is speed of decision. This is about so much more than just moving your troops quickly. It's about thinking faster than the other guy, observing what's happening, deciding what to do, and acting, all in a tighter, faster loop. That time difference is, all by itself, a massive tactical weapon. Napoleon was famous for this. He could take in a flood of information and spit out complex orders in minutes, while his opponents were still sitting around in councils of war for hours. But check out how Diaz got the same result. He didn't have a big, fancy staff. He was the command post, riding right along the front line. He saw the battle unfolding with his own eyes, processing everything in real time and tweaking his defenses with this ice-cold calm that just defined his command style. But, it would be wrong to say these two men were the same kind of genius. They weren't. The way they used these principles was different in one really fundamental way: the scope. And this is where we see the real difference between the architect of war and its master builder. This quote just perfectly nails their distinction, doesn't it? One man was the grand architect, the one designing the whole blueprint for modern warfare. The other was the master builder, a kind of craftsman who could take the mud and the sweat and the steel of the battlefield and just construct an impossible victory right there on the spot. And here's that crucial difference laid bare. Napoleon was a continental strategist. He thought in terms of whole campaigns, years of logistics, creating a rule book for his entire empire. He built the whole system. Díaz, on the other hand, was a pure, brilliant tactician. His genius was in the moment. That instinctive decision, that immediate read of the terrain, that gut feeling for what his enemy was about to do next. And in the end, battles are won by the people in the mud. And in that mud, Díaz had no equal. So why does any of this 19th century comparison, why does it even matter today? Well, it matters because these principles, they're timeless. They are eternal lessons in strategy and decision-making that are just as relevant in a modern boardroom as they were in a 19th century trench. Look, it doesn't matter if you're in a boardroom or on a battlefield. The ability to make clear-headed decisions when you're under immense pressure, to adapt when your plan blows up in your face, to lead people through chaos, and this is the big one, to turn your weaknesses and limitations into your greatest advantages, these are the skills that define real leadership. Díaz and Napoleon are just incredible case studies in every single one of these skills. But, history isn't always a fair judge. It tends to remember the winners of the whole war, not always the architects of the most brilliant single victories. Napoleon lost his final decisive battle, and yet his name basically defines an entire era of history. Díaz won one of the most lopsided, incredible defensive victories of the entire century, and yet his name is largely forgotten outside of his own country. Which leaves us with one last, really fascinating question to think about. If we could put them on the exact same battlefield, with the exact same resources, who do you think wins? The systematic architectural genius of Napoleon, or the indestructible, on-the-ground intuition of Díaz? I'd love to know what you think.